Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven and WNHH New Haven's home for community radio 103.5 FM live stream, newhavenindependent.org. A lot of stuff going on in the world today, and this hour we're going to look at what's happening in Connecticut with New Haven and Hartford politics. And in the second half of the hour, we're going to talk about the war in Ukraine with someone here who's been watching it for a long time and followed the roots of the conflict and will tell us what they think is next. Say good morning welcome back to the WNHH studio to one of my favorite guests, Sarah Ganong. She is the newly named State Director of the Working Families Party. Sarah, welcome back to Dateline New Haven.
Thanks so much for having me again. Good to see you.
And thank you for schlepping here. And Sarah's been on a bunch of times in the past, beginning in 2016 when she led a contingent working for Bernie Sanders and making great change within the Democratic Party in that presidential race 2016. 2017 ran the campaign for Josh Elliott and here in Hamden, become a state rep. And has been with Working Families since 2017, ascending to this new job. So the Working Families Party, you're the state director, which is described as leading legislative, electoral, and statewide campaign work. So that means you help try to get laws passed?
Yes, and make sure we're electing good folks to office as well.
What's electoral and statewide campaign work? Does that mean for offices that don't cover the whole state as well, or offices that cover the whole state?
Yep.
I'm going to ask you a little closer to the mic. And then let's remind people what the Working Families Party is, because they're often confused with the Democratic Party. And Elizabeth Palmisano says she's wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for listening. I agree.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
The Working Families Party runs as a third party sometimes. Well, it has a slot on the ballot. Often you endorse Democrats who are also on the ballot. Let's say Rosa DeLauro is always going to it's Gary Winfield if they're progressive. And then you also sometimes run your own candidates.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you decide when to do which?
So we describe ourselves as a independent third party, want to be the electoral vehicle for the working class to actually really gain governing power for working people, middle class folks, people like you and me, I would say, Paul. So we really take elections very seriously and think that that's the vehicle and the terrain that is a political party we're trying to use to win power. And thus make sure that we're choosing elections, choosing candidates really strategically. So sometimes it makes the most sense to try to gain power by winning an election of somebody running Working Families Party only. We've done that in special elections. We have 2 folks in the Hartford City Council, for example. And sometimes it makes more sense to try to get our folks in office by running them in Democratic primaries, primarying a corporate Democrat, or having somebody who's really fantastic, like you named Representative DeLauro, be cross-endorsed on the WFP
line. And therefore you have some influence in what she does. Like if DeLauro knows when she's running for re-election that people in some more conservative suburbs might want to take one stand, she's also going to be hearing from you pushing her to the left.
Yes, and it's a signal to, both to the politicians and to the voters of, hey, these are the folks that maybe are a little bit more aligned with all our shared values.
And talking about those values, when the rubber meets the road, you're talking about universal health care, Green New Deal, raising the minimum wage, paid family medical leave. Those last 2 you've won.
Yes.
I guess there's more work on that. Affordable housing, fair tax structure. Would you say that's a good kind of summary of the kind of issues you're pushing?
That's a very good summary, yeah.
Now, there's a battle for the working class, and the Democrats are not winning. For the first time in my adult lifetime, voters nationwide say they on a generic congressional ballot identify more as Republicans than Democrats. And that's coming from the working class.
Yep.
They're saying that Democrats speak more for them. And they see Republicans, they see Democrats as elites who, even though they advocate what you and I would call more work-class friendly economic policies, whether it's cultural policies or just not believing in the genuinity or knowing that a lot of people in both parties are bought by corporate interests, the Democrats are losing. So how do you fit into that?
So I think that's one of the reasons, right, that we are trying to build a separate independent third party rather than working to build the Democrats, right? Building a separate party is substantially harder in our view, but that's still the way that we have chosen to engage in politics, because I think, as you're saying, right, that a lot of the Democratic Party, particularly on the national level, as we're seeing right now, is really not responding to what working folks need in terms of affordable health care, housing, just sort of all the kinds of retirement security, education, right? We saw a small example that we saw the president ran on, I think talked about, was student debt. That hasn't been addressed yet, right? There's things like that neither major party is really answering to.
So, I mean, and I think I've talked about this when I was in college. The fight was between DSOC, which was the Democrat Social Organizing Committee, precursor to DSA, and the Citizens Party, which was one said you work within the party to make the change as a faction they need. The other says you build a third party because the other one is irredeemable. The first side says the story of American politics now for 2 centuries, I mean, since the mid-1800s, is that you're not going to get that third party. So you've kind of tried to take the best of both. And in the strategic point, you're also looking when there are minority party representation
Yes,
issues.
absolutely.
So in Hamden and Hartford, a certain number of council members have to be from another party. So sometimes the Republicans say that's not fair play because you're really Democrats. Are they right?
We would argue no, they're not right. That we're a separate, independent party. Certainly share some values with the Democrats, but would identify ourselves as a separate institution and have just as much ability and right to be expressing our views in those candidates and elected officials. And obviously the voters agree, right? These folks are getting elected over Republicans as well.
So Sarah Ganong, the new state director of the Working Families Party, you step in at an even number year, which
Yes.
means and the 4-year cycle when all the state offices are up. So it's a big year.
Yes, it
You
is.
talked about the national debate about where the Democratic Party should go. In Connecticut, it's fair to say, Working Families Party tends to line up behind the statewide and the state legislative candidates. Not all that Democratic Party puts up because we're a bluer state. Fair to say?
Yeah, we're really concerned about making sure that we don't lose any of the Democratic trifecta, right? That we think it's better
The
for
2 houses and governor.
Yep, we think it's better
So
for
you
our
would even
people.
support Lamont, even though his policies are basically old-fashioned Yankee
So
Republican.
we have not begun the endorsement process yet, but are incredibly concerned about Bob Stefanowski and are not interested in seeing a Governor Stefanowski, a Senator Claridis. So going to make sure that we're doing all that we can to fight back against the right wing here in Connecticut as well as nationally.
And how do you see those 2 races?
Depends on the day. I think it's going to be an important fight. Obviously, you mentioned it's a even numbered year, so 2022 is a big
And the
year
year
for us.
issues, where the Republicans have made inroads in places like Virginia, and
Yep.
the issues they're playing here in Connecticut are COVID fatigue, crime. They're talking about juvenile crime, especially the police accountability bill, and inflation. So they're riding those issues, and now we don't know whether this is going to work or not. But these corruption scandals involving Lamont, Stefanowski's hoping to ride, which we don't know, and he doesn't know if that's going to resonate because they tend not to. Governor Rowland ran for his 3rd term when it was publicly stated by his opponent, Democratic opponent, this guy gave hundreds of millions of dollars to this company, Tommaso, in no bid contracts. He got favors. He's going to prison if you reelect him. Rowland was still overwhelmingly reelected and went to prison during the term. Do you think it's going to play out this year? How do you see your fight on issues in those 2 baskets?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember, right, that Bob Stefanowski is somebody whose sort of loan shark business is not legal to do in Connecticut. That I think
Payday lending?
Yep. He's throwing a lot of negatives, obviously, at the governor as his job while running for office. But I think that we're going to spend a lot of time making sure that his record is really clear to the voters as well, and that he's not
Does he still run that company?
I don't know, actually. But that's how we made his money.
Okay, and where do you see the landscape going? So nationally, you talked about this issue where, like, say, in Texas, where Working Families Party is supporting a challenge to an incumbent from Jennifer Cisneros, who's a conservative.
Jessica, yeah.
Jessica,
Yep.
sorry, running against an incumbent who's under investigation for corruption and conservative on abortion. There's an argument going on nationally, and some of the liberal press has kind of taken the moderate wing side, and we saw it between Biden and Sanders in the primary. The moderate wing says the Democrats are going to lose control of Congress. You're going to have a Republican Congress again, almost definitely, and they might get the Senate, which would really stop any progress in all the issues you care about. So you got to get those moderate swing voters by running in the center. And then the progressive wing says it's the working families who think we've abandoned them to the Republicans, so trying not to just make the better case for what we believe in on the better policies for housing and taxes and paid family leave and minimum wage actually hurts us in showing that we stand for something. Who's right?
I would argue that we're right, since sitting here representing Working Families Party, and that we're obviously very concerned about purple districts, but also don't think that progressives can't win in purple districts either. That there's a lot of folks who agree that we have a political system that's just not working for most of us. I think we're seeing that in Congress, especially. And that we can bring people together around some of these kind of shared
Arizona
values.
would be purple. Didn't Sanders won, or was it Nevada? He won the primary in Nevada, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Even last year. But then in other districts, you look at Spanberger, some people in Michigan, they say they actually get hurt by being tagged with that when they're going for blue-collar votes. So is it about knowing how to make your case well?
We think that it also who the candidate is really important, that finding folks that are from the communities or doing the work, right? Some of my
like
favorite,
Cori Bush.
yeah, some of my favorite people to run, for example, are Parent-Teacher Association volunteers for Board of Education. These are folks that are engaged in their communities. They care about their kids' schools. They're going to all of the meetings anyway, helping them develop the skills. And we do that a lot through candidate recruitment and training and staff trainings and having them develop the skills that they need to run for office and make some of those decisions anyway.
Sarah Ganong, the new state director of Working Families Party, trying to push the subject to the left of working families issues. We're watching nationally. We talked about it on the air that the right is recruiting candidates.
Yes.
And your job is recruiting candidates.
Yep.
So on school board issues, they're getting people to run for school board. They're getting people who deny that Joe Biden won the last election to actually become elections officials, and they're winning. People who say that that election officials should go to prison if they certified an election for Joe Biden when he won more votes. And they're saying that it's hard for progressives to find candidates. That's at least the conventional wisdom, Sarah, that for whatever reason that you can count on the progressives to vote for Congress and president. It's harder to get them to care about school board. It's hard to get them to care about their city council. It's hard to get them to take the time to run for elections offices. Is that true in your experience, and how are you addressing that?
That has not been our experience. I think one of the things in Connecticut that really helps for folks running for state legislative and constitutional seats is the Great Citizens Election program we have. So you actually don't have to raise as much money as you do in a lot of other states in order to be competitive here, which is absolutely fantastic.
But what about the smaller issues? It's all volunteer. Because I would never, ever in my life run for any office like that. You spend all these long hours, and it's important work. It's the great basic work of democracy, but it's so frustrating and boring, and you'd rather be doing other things. So how are you finding them? You just brought up PTA people. Have you actually found people who get involved in the PTA you put up for office?
Yep. Yeah.
That's awesome. Who'd you find?
So Shantae Brody, who's on the Board of Education in Hartford as the Working Families Party only, was a really involved parent in her schools and was somebody that sort of approached us and was interested in running for office and was recruited by some allies. And she's now
you did training, like you helped with that campaign?
Yep. Yeah.
What training do you give? Like ones and twos, and using the app that identifies the voters, or finding precinct captains? What kind?
Yeah, all the training, nuts and bolts of running a campaign, and work to have people be able to tell their stories. Right, if we're recruiting folks to run for office because they have personally been impacted by what they're trying to change, bringing that story forward, which can be really scary and personal, is we think hugely important. People running as their whole selves and running to address things that have affected them, their families, their communities.
Wow, that's an interesting pitch there. So who else have you found beside her? Who else have you been running?
So we're really excited. Not everybody that I'm going to talk about has actually announced yet, but there's 4 Republicans who have retired or announced that they're retiring from the state Senate. So there's some exciting candidates running there that will be working on those races.
Where are those races?
Oh gosh, all over this state. The 4, so I think sort of northwest corner, maybe middle-ish of the states. Paul Formica down in the New London area, and somebody in kind of Fairfield County as well.
So those first 3 are the battleground we're talking about.
Exactly.
Are you talking about like the Torrington area?
Yeah. So we're excited about potential for candidates in those districts.
That's the Rust Belt.
Exactly.
And Meriden. And you do have now. How blue or purple or red are those districts where there were Republicans?
It varies. I mean, obviously they've elected Republicans in the last cycle in 2020, but we also think that there's the opportunity with some of the retiring Republicans to start making some new cases for folks who share our values.
And what kind of people are you recruiting there?
So we're really excited. Going to probably be mostly women running. So some of these folks that we're still having conversations, so don't want to spoil anything.
Are they people you found on the school board, or where'd you find them?
It's a mix, yeah.
Without giving identity, I'm just curious where you find them.
So some folks who've run for office previously, some folks who are interested, and people who've been engaged in their communities, work for various community organizations.
And how about Secretary of State? That's in other states, it's a big issue. Who's Secretary of State, top elections official? Is that really at risk here this year? I guess you can never take anything for granted. Yeah,
absolutely not. And we know, as you said, right, Republicans are recruiting everywhere, and that's one of the big races that they're paying a lot of attention to in a lot of places.
There are a lot of candidates running there. How do you feel about the field there?
I'm excited. There's a lot of progressive folks who are really interested in advancing election reform, and I think since we're in a blue state that hopefully remains blue, there's the opportunity for a lot of really interesting democracy reform options here, right? Ranked choice voting, sort of different ways of thinking about expanding early voting, absentee ballots. We have some of the most restrictive rules in the whole country around those things.
So you want that trifecta. So are you basically okay with anything for all three? Or is RCV going to matter, ranked voting? Because there is a disagreement. We've had a bunch of them on. And, Josh Elliott's putting ranked choice voting. Stephanie Thomas is kind of not into it, or Hilda Santiago. They are progressive on other issues. Are you going to be in that much in the weeds, or is it just going to be, let's get a Democrat who wants early voting and absentee, no excuse, and then we'll just have gravy for RCV?
Yeah, so we're still in the process of the endorsement process, and kind of just making sure we're having conversations with candidates. There'll be public opportunities for folks to watch interviews that we're doing with all of the candidates as well. But yeah,
really?
Stay tuned. Stay tuned on that.
That'll
for sure.
Be fun.
Yeah.
Sarah Ganong, State Director of the Working Families Party. Sarah, so last year the big victories for the agenda you folks are pushing over the years included, the last couple of years, paid family medical leave. We have a strong law. It just took effect. We raised minimum wage to $15 an hour. What's on your plate this year? Short session, 12 weeks, we're a couple weeks in. What are you looking for?
Yeah, so our big priority for this year is a fair work week, fair scheduling law, which we think really is a good accompaniment to the $15 minimum wage. That was the beginning of answering folks who aren't making enough money to make ends meet, right? So we're addressing that with...
Meaning the way that someone can work for 5 years at Starbucks and never get enough hours to be getting health insurance, and more importantly, can never have a schedule that they'll know about until the last minute if they need daycare or sleep.
Yes, schedules they can rely on.
The other day, there was a big fire in Hamden, and they were giving away clothing to burnt out families at the Hotel Clarion, and Nora Grace Flood, our reporter, went to talk to the families, and they got so many donations that it wasn't just the burnt out families who were getting, homeless people. One of the people picking up clothing, works at the hotel. And she can't afford a bed. She's homeless, sleeping on the street. So even if I was doing the math, if she gets $15 an hour, but if she gets 29 hours, you'd have to be homeless.
Yeah. So we're really trying to make sure that these big corporations, right, the McDonald's, the Targets, the Dunkin' Donuts, all of those kinds of big companies that absolutely can afford this, can make the schedules work for the workers. So
how would you do that?
So the bill will require a certain amount of notice for what folks' hours are, so they're not getting a call at 6 a.m. saying you're coming in at 8 o'clock. It would make sure that clopenings don't happen, where somebody works the late shift in the evening and then has to come open the store the next morning, which is unfortunately... Clopenings, yeah, it's the industry term. But that's unfortunately really common, right? If people are closing their McDonald's, whatever it is, then they come back in 5:30, 6 a.m. for the next shift and don't get an adequate amount of time to sleep. Right, not driving under safe conditions, home with their families.
How do you bar that? I mean, there are all sorts of...
So there'll be penalties within the law associated with individual situations where it happens.
And how does it work when there's franchises? Like they often McDonald's say it's not our company.
Yeah, so
how does that work?
So they would be under the law. They would be required to follow these rules, or the penalties would occur.
This is a really interesting bill.
It is.
Tell us when the hearing is. We'll want to cover that.
Okay, great. We'll do.
Who's sponsoring that?
So it's going to be coming out of the Labor Committee.
So is that Robin Porter?
Yeah. So yeah, Representative Porter, Senator Kushner are two of the many proponents, but they'll be the leaders.
All right. And then anything else you want to mention before we let you go about this upcoming year and your new job? You excited about it?
Yeah, very excited. As you said, right, 2022 is a big election year, and we're an electoral organization,
and you're in the
really
debate
ready.
in the country about where our politics go.
Yeah, for sure.
You're right on the front line of that. What did you learn, Sarah, from working on the Sanders campaign in 2016 and doing very well, doing that huge upset that you engineered with a whole group of new people electing Josh Elliott for state rep? What have you learned that you didn't know before as you take on this job from those experiences? Yeah,
I think the two key points, and these are things that we're really trying to bring through in our work, is that choosing elections and choosing candidates really matters. That the moment somebody is running in, what office they're running for and who they are the really key pieces that, right, and we've talked about this. There's some situations where running somebody Working Families Party only does not make strategic sense. So that's not the path we choose. There's some situations where there's a great candidate that it does make sense to do that, like with the former Senator Ed Gomes, Representative Joshua Hall, who were both elected first, WFP only, that in those moments it made sense.
All right. And you said second lesson, you said?
That was two. Candidates matter, right?
Timing matters.
Yep.
Right.
Candidates, timing, and offices.
That was style.
Awesome.
You came all the way from Hartford.
I did. Thanks for having me.
You ran for mayor in New Haven.
I did.
And
I did.
And I think you're just onto more great stuff, Sarah Ganong. So thank you for coming.
Thanks so
to
much.
Dateline New Haven. Good luck this session.
Thank you.
Come back later. Let us know how it goes.
We will. We'll do.
Okay, folks, hold tight. We're going to get ready part 2 about the war in Ukraine with David Cameron, who was on a few weeks ago, one of the closest observers of that scene for decades. He'll let us know what's happening and what we can expect next. Thanks to Harry Droz, the best station manager in the business. And he does have competition. Right person, right election, right candidate. And we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.